Minister, Excellencies, distinguished guests, colleagues, and in many cases, great friends. I have to say I'm absolutely delighted to be invited here today. I've been a friend of Somalia for over 25 years. And I can say, as an economist, an international economist, I know of few countries that is endowed with such incredible potential. Somalia, yes indeed, has the potential to become a regional powerhouse and also to become a strong driver of reforms, as we'll talk about in a moment, that are profound and historically have not happened before. One thing I can say from my experience of advising many countries, it's what sets a country apart. It's what is different about a country, not what is similar about it. When one thinks of Germany, one thinks of industrial capability. If you think of UK, I think of financial services industry. So Somalia, like many countries, is landlocked on one side, but sea-locked on the other side. Both land and sea are impediments to wider integration unless strategic investments remove those obstacles and those boundaries. And this, I think, is part of the very real challenge that we have ahead of us. If Somalia had been landlocked next to Germany, you'd had a very different future. If you'd have been sea-locked next to Singapore, you have a very different future as well. But look where Somalia sits, and look what's going on. China is expanding its influence. Djibouti. The Saudis are building up their industrial capability along their coast as they diversify away from oil. The other Gulf states are building up their capability on this side of the Red Sea. There's a huge potential and greater interest in this space, in this region, in this beautiful country than I have known in my lifetime. And that is a huge opportunity for all of us. One critical factor on the economic development side is that economic potential is not solely determined by location. Location can be an asset, but it is also can by itself be a determinant of failure. So what sets Somalia apart is its absolute competitive and comparative advantages, of which Somalia is extremely well endowed. So what makes Somalia different? What makes it unique and different? First of all, there's only one Somalia. It's not like there's two, and you're competing against another one. Your history, your culture, your art, your music has still largely to be discovered by much of the international community. Your strategic position in the Horn is actually now a precondition for wider stability, including Gulf and Chinese and other expansion. You're not actually on the periphery. You're at the center of what's happening. You have a coastline of 3,333 kilometers, a blue economy. We don't even know the value of it. Your diaspora has intellect, experience, and deep business connections globally. Your youth, the youth bulge, supremely well placed, not just to bounce back from conflict, but to bounce forward and bringing a new set of innovations. The rate of urbanization here in Somalia will also mean that governance will become easier. It'll be municipality based. Agriculture, oil and gas, minerals, fisheries, energy, market integration, financial markets. I can go on. All of these, to a large extent, are at a low base compared to surrounding economies. From an investment point of view, that is a huge opportunity to capitalize on. And early entrance into such a market, domestic and international, will benefit from the courage that they take. The international community now also, I believe, is showing greater commitment to changing the way that it has historically worked and moving towards very different financing modalities which will unlock private capital, much of which has often sat on the sideline. So in fact, it's your competitive advantage that must stay foremost, I think, in the minds of the National Economic Council? What sets you different? What are the comparative and competitive advantages that you have? And in this sense, I think not just because this is the first National Economic Council, but this is truly an historic moment. Not only does it symbolize, I think, the resilience of Somalian government and its citizens in overcoming a legacy of conflict, it also symbolizes a significant progress that this government is making in thinking about how to balance public and private relationships in the middle towards national economic development. 2 days ago, I was in the south of France. How many of you have been to France? Put your hand up if you've been to France. When you go to the south of France, you drive on these roads, and by the side of the road, people have planted these trees. And they're so beautiful. Those trees were planted 100 years ago. The people who planted those trees never saw what I saw. They planted it selflessly for us. And here we come, I think, into this situation where the role of your government and National Economic Council is to lay the foundation for the many generations to come. So the Economic Council has clearly to have vision, it has to be strident and progressive in its work, and it needs to be unyielding in its desire to strengthen the prosperity of this beautiful country. The affairs of any country, the economy, the way it is governed, and the way public and private capital is mobilized is the critical factor, actually, what determines the success of a nation. Now, there's many priorities which I think we will all eventually talk about. But the role that Somalia plays within the wider region is beginning to emerge. I just want to put on some of the empirics on this. In the regional context, improving regional connectivity remains critical to creating mutual dependencies. Mutual dependencies between interests where the economic incentive champions the political and security incentive itself. If one compares Somalia to Eritrea, for example, Somalia is behind on trade, on financial markets and macroeconomic integration. If one compares Somalia to Kenya, it is behind on productive integration, trade finance, and free movement of people. If one compares Somalia to Chad, it's only behind on financial markets. So, three critical areas for your economic integration to play a wider regional role, and this is a role for the Council, is to think about how to promote trade integration, and that requires physical integration, major corridors, hubs, special economic zones, new investments that lower the costs of transaction between economies, productive integration, and financial markets. Hard infrastructure is important. I believe it's a necessary but insufficient precondition. And it's the soft infrastructure, the governance, the relationships, the contracts, the concessions. These are the glue that bind the economy together. It's what binds a federal system together. If you look at Afghanistan and Pakistan, two countries I know particularly well, there's some important lessons in conflict. When I was an advisor to President Karzai for about 8 years. When we first went into Kabul in 2001, there was not a single dollar in Treasury. And now the government has $2.5 billion of annual revenue. $2.5 billion doesn't solve their problem, but it's a long way to building state capacities to be able to govern the economy itself. And Afghanistan has largely done this through having two strategic corridors. It's the corridors and the governance around them which are important. So the economic model is one where you have these big anchor investments that change the art of what is possible, and then the ancillary investments, the energy and the water and the financial markets, that has this wider spin-over effect onto the economy. And it's the spin-offs that affect real people and poverty and so forth. So it's therefore, I think, our work as a council to support yourself, Prime Minister, the President, the Executive, to think through and identify sets of priorities where the rate of return on investment is positive in terms of growth, revenues and jobs. Those are three critical factors by themselves. Such a reality calls, I think, for rethinking in part the investment approach, which has been overly dominated often by donors. Donors are very, very important, but as you see, it's insufficient by itself. So there are some new modalities, new ways, new instruments which are beginning to emerge. I think amongst our colleagues as we move forward, some of these might start to have a significant impact. For example, developing Somalia's unique brand as a developing nation and investment destination. I was mentioning to one of my colleagues before, I know some private operators, they are shifting freight from Kenya to the MIA because the costs of storage here are 25% of there. Huge storage potential here. You have a coastline. Could be a huge business, huge cargo freight business, out-compete any of the other major markets. But we have to think about what those advantages are. There needs to be a national investment strategy together, and I think, Minister Jamal, there's, moves to putting this in place. Prioritizing amongst the many objectives that I've heard it from you, of the 1,000 things that need to be done, what are the 10 most critical ones that we simply have to get right because they enable the rest round of investment? Prioritizing investments in what we call the blue economy, the ocean. I don't know the value of your ocean. I guess none of us do. It's certainly worth billions, most of which seeps out. Governing the blue economy is by itself something which can drive revenue for state itself. Economic integration, special economic zones, you see them coming all over the world. So we know what the modalities are. We know where the money is. And I think this is what makes the life of the Council, in the way it advises you, is to identify the primary priorities and how they can actually be put on the ground to make a difference. Indeed, I guess that's how you will judge the impact of the Council, of how it translates into the real world. Some other observations quickly, which are important. There's this huge push towards blended finance globally. I was in New York 10 days ago. Blended finance is mixing donor aid and public money with private money to lower the risk for private operators so that they come into a market where they wouldn't otherwise. The whole world is now looking at these modalities here. Minister, I know you've been working on this yourself. Finally, maybe I conclude. I'm delighted to support your work. I think this is an amazing country with amazing potential. There is much more to be done that has been done. We have to believe that it's possible, and we have to be very pragmatic and practical in how we deliver that. So to my colleagues, my council members, and I will try and uphold these things, to be diligent and striding in our work, to echo what you said, to be evidence-based in determining what we believe to be the best course of action, to be innovative in the solutions that we might propose where they might be possible, and to be enduring in our quest for Somalia to be an attractive brand and destination of choice. And for that, I am very, very delighted to assist you in serving in whatever way I possibly can, and I'd like to congratulate you on this very historic day today. Thank you, Prime Minister.
And Senate Peter.